Welcome everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the election in Portugal. It is due to be held on this Sunday this week, and it's already shaping up to be a very close and very interesting election, and one that will surely be watched very closely across Europe. It is first and foremost the last parliamentary election in the EU before the one for the European elections in June. And so this might give one small indication about where European voters might be leaning. The polls are now predicting a change of government for Portugal, including a sharp increase for the party on the far right, Chega. This may be also something that's in the cards for Europe in June. And then here in Denmark, people are also suddenly showing an interest in how the coming months will play out for the outgoing Prime Minister António Costa, and especially his chances to become the next president of the European Council, because our own Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen is also being tied to that position these days. But for Portugal, of course, this may even be a quite special election, because next month in April, it will be the 50 years anniversary of the revolution that marked the end of the old authoritarian regime in 1974, the so-called Carnation Revolution. And to guide us through this election, why it matters for Portugal, but also for Europe, we are so lucky as to have you, Miguel Morgado, with us. You are Professor of Political Science at the Catholic University of Portugal, based in Lisbon. And you've also been a member both of the Parliament and of the Prime Minister's team as its advisor between 2011 and 15. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rasmus. It's wonderful to be here.
We're very glad to have you. And my name is, as you said, Rasmus Voss from Think Tank Europa. So, Miguel, when we talked last week, I mentioned how the Economist magazine had called Portugal a European success story. Basically because of how Portugal had come back after the devastating financial crisis a decade ago. And it seemed you didn't quite agree with this sentiment. So please tell us what, in your view, is the story of Portugal over the last 10 years and why it's not just a simple story of success.
Well, first of all, I have to warn you and the audience that nowadays the big media, newspapers and magazines, when they have cover stories about small countries like Portugal or Greece or countries like that, they are usually very conditioned by the propaganda efforts of the respective governments. So you have to be very, you have to look for other sources in order to get the correct information about what's going on. So Portugal have had until 2010 a very disappointing 10 years while it was a member of the Eurozone. So we were stagnated. We had one of the worst performances in terms of GDP growth. Portugal had the worst, along with Italy. Actually, it was even worse than Greece's. And then that catastrophic financial crisis came and hit Portugal very, very hard. Portugal was very vulnerable at the time. It had accumulated a lot of foreign debt as well as public debt. And so the private sector and the public sector were actually bankrupt. So as you know, as you may remember, we had the socialist government asked for, in desperation, of course, asked for in May 2011, asked for a financial assistance program, very harsh, very hard, not as harsh as the Greek one, but still it was a harsh program. And they lost the election. I mean, the socialists resigned, and we had a general election, and the incumbent prime minister at the time, José Sócrates, who was 3 years after that, was arrested on very serious corruption charges. Actually, they lost the election at the time. So the center of right party, the PSD, which stands for the Social Democratic Party, in Portugal, it means center-right party, not a center-of-left party as in Scandinavia, for instance. But they won the election and they led a coalition government, a center-of-right coalition government, for 4 years, executing trying to reach the objectives written under the assistance program with the European Union. So in 2015, the country had recovered. It had started to reduce both foreign debt as well as public debt. We were able to reconnect to the financial markets, and the economy was growing slowly. In 2015 and 2019, between 15 and 19, the socialists went into government. They lost the election, and they lost it big. I mean, the Social Democrats won by a big margin, but they were not able to reach an absolute majority. So what the socialists did in 15, yes. So what the socialists did was something that had never been done before in Portugal. Portugal always had a very strong communist party. After the Berlin Wall fell, it's still a Stalinistic communist party. It's not like the Communist Party as it was in Italy. It's a lot like the Greek Communist Party, still attached to the ideal of the Soviet Union and, justifying Stalin's crimes every day. So it's something like that. After the Berlin Wall fell, of course, they were beginning to die because they were losing support with every election. But in a movement that happened all around Europe, a new generation of far left parties emerged, as well in Portugal, in France, in Spain, and combined, they always, with the communists, they were always strong in parliament, but they were considered off limits for a moderate government. They were not eligible, as it were, to become coalition partners in any government. But in 2015, António Costa, realized that he was finished. If he just went into opposition, he would be finished. His career would be over. So he did what no one did before, which was to say, these parties are moderates after all. They're not radicals. He was lying, of course, but anyway, that's what he did. So he was able to become prime minister between 15 and 19 with the support of those radical. In the case of the Communist Party, a totalitarian party, I can give you examples. They think North Korea is a democracy. They are on the record saying that North Korea is a democracy. They're big supporters of Cuba, of course.
That experience may even become sort of relevant after the election on Sunday with the case of Chega, the other far right, or then the far right party, which the current center right leader rules out forming a coalition. But let's get back to that later. Before, so as you said, Costa has been there since 2015, which is more than 8 years at this point, and he's now the second longest sitting prime minister in the EU, except for Viktor Orban. Tell us, what will be his legacy? You think over these 8 years? How will we look back on this period, both for him as a prime minister, but also for Portugal and Portugal's development?
So he'll become acknowledged in the future for breaking this precedent that moderate parties do not join in political alliance with radical far left parties. And now we have the problem with the far right party, but we'll discuss that in a minute. So don't forget that Costa fell in disgrace. He resigned on very serious charges, corruption charges, regarding his most close associates in government. Don't forget that the inquiry, which is still going on, found a lot of money hidden in his own cabinet, in Summit where I worked, right? So he had a chief of staff, which is now, he is now under investigation, very serious allegations. He had been before investigated, but Costa hired him again 2 years ago against everyone's advice, but he did. So now they went to the point of the police. They had a search warrant and they went to the cabinets, the offices where I worked, and they found money hidden in books. I mean, this cabinet is placed 5 meters from where Costa works every day. So it's really serious stuff. I'm not saying he's corrupt himself, but he has tolerated a lot of practices within his own government that were permeable to this culture of, Nepotism. He led the most nepotistic government in Portuguese history. We had father and daughter as ministers. We had husbands and wives as ministers in the same government, which was, I mean, there was no precedent for this. And Portugal had always a corrupt culture in politics and outside politics, but this one went too far. Don't forget, he was a very close ally to José Sócrates, who was the previous socialist prime minister who was arrested and spent 1 year in jail and is still going to be tried now. So he fell in disgrace. It's not like as if it was prime minister for 8 years and now, he just got tired of running again, and he left and he gave the party to somebody else. No. It was not like that. So right now, the rejection rate of the government, of course, is very, very high. He is not now a popular leader as he was in 2017, 17, 18. Okay? At the time, those years, he was a popular guy here, he and the president of the republic, but not anymore. So Costa was someone who gained power by mobilizing at least a part of public opinion against what the previous government had done. So politics in Portugal is still frozen around the debate between 2011 and 2015. The Troika years, austerity, who cut the wages to the public employees, who cut the pensions, who raised the taxes the most. That's still the argument going on. So those were very harsh years. A lot of people became very annoyed at the time government who was executing the program that the socialists had negotiated with the European Commission. And the deal was, I won't touch anything regarding those topics. Costa wouldn't touch anything, so he wouldn't do any structural reform. In 8 years, Costa was not able to do any structural reform at all. And he went on the record in an interview saying that he had an allergy to structural reform. So what he did was he was able to keep the support of the eldest. A large chunk of the retirees support the socialist parties because they were mobilized by that rhetoric against all those pension cuts that were carried out during the Troika years. So right now the socialist base is is aging very rapidly. So the young in Portugal vote on the right now. We have different parties on the right, so they are very distributed. It's not only on the far right, but right now the young vote is, astonishing margin, by an astonishing margin. I mean, 75-25, going for the right-wing parties. But the eldest still keep a very strong support to the socialists. And as you know, Portugal is a very aging country, so that's the big chunk of the electorate.
So it almost seems, with all this in mind, that the election could offer a fresh start. A new prime minister and perhaps a new government. It's very rare that we hear about Portuguese politics here in Denmark. Could you perhaps outline the overall picture? Who are the main contenders in this election? What are the expectations at this point, based on the polls?
Yep.
And of course, based on this, who will be able to form a government if it turns out as it looks at this moment?
All right. So from 76, 77, after the revolution, Portuguese politics has been dominated by two parties: the socialists, which are actually social democrats in Scandinavian terminology. And then we have the social democrats. They are actually the center of right, the popular party, as you have in Spain, or you have the CDU in Germany. The CDU in Germany, that's the social democrats here. They were able to dominate politics for 50 years, either win the socialists or the social democrats. We never had a different government from this, okay? The socialists, after 95, for reasons which are complicated to explain, but they have been ruling the country for most of this period. So a lot of the rhetoric coming from the opposition now is, listen, since 95, we have been ruling the country with no results. We only have been allowed, the Social Democrats are saying we are only have been allowed to govern in emergency conditions, the Troika years. And then we were kicked out again. So they are asking for a mandate to rule the country without being under emergency conditions, you see? So the Socialists and the Social Democrats were able in the 90s to combine 80% of the support of the electorate, 80%, 85%, like you had in Greece until the financial crisis between the PASOK and the New Democracy, and like you had in Spain with PSOE, the Socialists, and the Popular Party. It was a very similar picture. But then, after the financial crisis, we were able to avoid Greece's path, which was the dissolution of the party system over there. The PASOK disappeared. But here, the Socialists survived. Social Democrats survived with strong support. The Socialists were able to get an absolute majority in the elections of 2022. Don't forget that Costa had an absolute majority, and it ruined that. So now it's not like that anymore. There's now a big frustration and a big disappointment with both parties. Of course, the Socialists have been losing the most support. It's natural. They've been ruling for a very long time, not only those 80 years, but if you go back from 95, so they lost a big chunk of their support, of course. But the Social Democrats were not able to capitalize on that insatisfaction with the Socialists now. So now you have not exactly a fragmentation of the party system, but the rise of a third party who they didn't exist before 2018. So it's not like Marine Le Pen in France. It's not like that. It's more like Meloni in Italy. Very recent party, margins, led by one person, and more or less alone. And in 5-6 years, they were able to get a lot of support. So we have as candidates for Prime Minister, the current leader of the Socialist Party, called Pedro Nuno Santos, a guy 48 years old. And then the leader of the Social Democrats running for Prime Minister is a guy called Luís Montenegro. He is 50 years old. I can tell you that Pedro Nuno Santos, the socialist, was minister under Costa and was fired by Costa. This is crazy. I mean, Costa is doing rallies right next to him saying that he's the guy. You should vote for this guy. But he fired him 6 months ago from his government because he was rather incompetent and he defied the authority of the prime minister. So Costa fired him. I mean, it's crazy. Now he's saying this is a good guy. But anyway, so this guy...
This just adds to the disappointment that you were talking about in the two main parties, right? So, yes. But please continue.
No, I was just concluding by saying that Luís Montenegro, so for you to make a picture of who this guy is, he was the leader of the parliamentary group of the Social Democrats during the Troika years. Okay, so he was very associated with those years. And you know that you carry that burden with you, of course. And he never had a cabinet, a position in cabinet. Okay, so these are the guys who are running. These are people who were born after the revolution. It's the first generation of leaders who were born after the revolution. First time that's going to happen. But now we have been witnessing the almost disappearance of the communists. It's going to be their worst results ever. They are on the verge of really disappearing, of this extinction. It's going to be a weak result for the left in general, because since 2015, since what Costa did, that the main rule of Portuguese politics is to understand who, after the election, gets the absolute majority of the members of parliament, either the sum of the left-wing parties or the sum of the right-wing parties. So to illustrate, if the left, all the parties on the left, 4 or 5 of them, get the absolute majority of the vote, even if the socialists are crushed, it doesn't matter. It's going to be a socialist prime minister. But
we have the same dynamic here in Denmark. So we are very used to that, and also the two old dominant parties. And then, as you're probably about to say, now in this election, we have a third large party, so to speak, Chega, the far right, which is polling at around 18-20%.
Yes.
So what kind of party is this, and will they be able to enter a governing coalition, or how does that look at the moment?
Okay, this is an amazing story, really, because it's like Giorgia Meloni. It's not like Marine Le Pen. It's really like Meloni. This party is led by a guy called André Ventura, and he was a member of the Social Democratic Party until 2018. So in 2018, the then leader, the Pedro Passos Coelho, who was the prime minister during the Troika years, he left. And the guy who replaced him at the leadership of that party was very unpopular. And a lot of people left the party in 2018 in disappointment. And three of them, went to form different political parties. So the Liberal Party was founded by a former member of the Social Democrats. The Alliance Party, which is now almost extinct, was founded by a previous leader of the Social Democrats. And then, of course, Chega, who was founded by André Ventura, who was a rank and file member, but very discreet and very low key. He's still very young. He's 40 years old now. So he founded this party completely alone. He had no one else of reputation, of wealth around him. So he made a very strong use of social networks. And we don't know this for sure, but as regards financing, it's very hard to get financing for a new non-socialist party in Portugal. If you're a socialist, you'll get a lot of money. But if not a socialist, it's very difficult. So the question is, how did he get not much money, but the minimum amount of money to be able to carry on in his daily operations? Many people say that the evangelicals, the Brazilian evangelicals, were instrumental in being able to finance him, at least in the 2-3 first years. Okay, so he got 7% of the vote in the last election in 2022. It was a big breakthrough. I mean, because then you have a lot of money from the state, because you have the minimum amount of members of parliament and so on and so forth. So now he's dealing, as he couldn't deal with other political parties because the televisions boycotted him before that. He was not able to go on national television because there was a national boycott. You have the whole media insulting him daily. I mean, it's a national sport by the journalists, television, newspaper, radio, saying all bad things about him. Some of them true, that he lies very comfortably. It's completely true. That he makes outrageous promises. That he says sometimes he's trying to moderate that. But, last 3 or 4 years, racist affirmations, racist claims against gypsies. It's not an all-around racist claim. It was focused on the gypsies. But he's trying to moderate that aspect of his persona. But he was able through the social networks. He's by far the most popular politician on social networks. And he has created a big young base. A lot of the young population is very keen on him. But at least even those kids who hate him know what he's doing and know what he's saying. And it's not like that. If you ask young kids what Pedro Nuno Santos, the socialist, is doing or saying, they don't know. And it's not like that if you ask the Social Democrat leader, to a 20-year-old guy here, what he's saying, what he is proposing. People just don't know. But they know about Ventura, So this notoriety rate of him is very, very high. It's a strong point. So now he's heading to the polls with to the national election with very strong opinion polls. I think that is not going to go through over 15%. That's my personal opinion. I think that in the last day, a lot of people are going to go for a vote on the Social Democrats as a way to punish the socialists.
But even 15% is a lot, and is something that can block another majority, right? So
yes.
how does it look? You mentioned Meloni, for example, and other European far-right leaders. Some have entered into government, some have not, and remained outside. What is likely to happen in the case of Chega? I mean, will they be able to form a government with the Social Democrats? And if not, then where does that leave Portuguese politics? You know, who will be able to govern?
Okay, so that's very important. When this Social Democrat leader, Luís Montenegro, was elected as leader of the party in July 2022, he made the commitment that he would never deal with Chega, even if he was in a situation that he needed Chega to rule. That was the strategy to block what the socialists were doing, which was saying, even though we are corrupt, incompetent, don't have any results, vote for us, because otherwise you are going to put fascists in government by this intermediary of the Social Democrats, because they're going to need the fascists. I mean, this is something that is happening all around Europe, right? That's what the left is saying, to create a resistance on the part of the voter to vote for center of right parties, because that would be the way of the far right to get into government. So Luís Montenegro said, no, I'm not going to make any deals with them. And I promised that, and this is a solemn promise, I prefer to resign. Okay? So he spent 1.5 years saying this. By now, that strategy has worked. The journalists, the media, the opponents are not, hammering all the time, you are going to make a coalition with these guys, with the fascists, you are an ally of the fascists. It doesn't work anymore, okay? But it creates a problem because, as I was saying before, the opinion polls don't give an absolute majority to the Social Democrats. I think they're going to win, the Social Democrats, but without an absolute majority in parliament. The Liberal Party, which is a small party, around 5-7% of the vote, it's a natural ally of the Social Democrats. And I think they'll make a coalition, a governing coalition. But even if they are put together, they'll be short of an absolute majority. Okay? So that leaves everything in the hands of Chega. So the Liberals and the Social Democrats have made a commitment, never with Chega. Never. So they're going to ask the President of the Republic to say, nominate us and we'll rule without an absolute majority. And then Chega, of course, which will be on top of a 30-40 member of parliamentary group, very strong, they will be able to kick down the government whenever they want. But that's part of politics. So I would say there will be a center of right government with a short parliamentary majority, and the left, the sum of the left will be very short without an absolute majority. So by themselves, the left will not be able to overthrow these governments, only with the help of Chega. So you see, Chega will be the kingmaker, but without being able to participate in government. So the big question in Portugal is, are they going to overthrow the governments immediately? Or this government will be able to rule for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then they'll overthrow them. That's the big strategic dilemma. I would say, if I had to guess, that Ventura is open to the example of Meloni. So all these guys, with certain exceptions, of course, Alternative for Deutschland is an exception, but Marine Le Pen, the guys in Vox in Spain, Meloni as Prime Minister, they're trying to moderate their previous original political positions. They're trying to replace the center of right parties. That's what Meloni is doing in Italy. She's going to smash the Popular Party, the Forza Italia. And then she won't be the far right leader anymore, but the center of rights, moderate, regular, normal Prime Minister. You know, you have to keep in mind that Syriza did this in Greece. Syriza was a far left party, and then they went into government. But PASOK, the center of left party, traditionally speaking, had been destroyed. So Tsipras, he realized that if he only kicked out Varoufakis and his group, very radical, very extremist, and they were kicked out from Syriza, he was able to reposition Syriza towards the center. And now Syriza, it's the center of left party in Greece. I mean, the leader of Syriza is a guy who worked for Goldman Sachs. Can you believe this? It's crazy, but it's true. So I think the guys on the far right, some of them are trying to make the same path. Ventura, he really believes, I personally know him for some years now. He really believes that he's going to be not number 2 or number 3 in the country, but number 1. He's a bit delusional like Trump is, like Trump, when you think that Trump is.
Yeah, but in that case, he's also playing the long game like Geert Wilders, and then hoping in the long run things will change, right?
That's
so.
Right.
In some ways, this is a familiar case, as you've just outlined. What from outside of Portugal, if we look beyond Portuguese politics, people will be interested in, how will this affect policy? How will it affect Portugal's position towards the European Union? Important questions in the EU, like say the enlargement of the Union, the war in Ukraine. Discussions ongoing now about defense, common defense, and so on. In your view, this change of government, which is likely from the socialists to the social democrats, what political consequences might it have, also in a broader European perspective? And let me just, before I give the floor to you again, let me just remind everyone that you're very welcome to ask questions to Miguel in the chat by writing the question in the chat, and we'll include it before we end in about 15 minutes. But the European implications, importance. How do you see this?
So the socialists and the social democrats in the early 80s combined to prepare Portugal joining the European community at the time. We joined along with Spain in 1986. And this was a joint effort by both parties, a sort of European consensus. We were able to disagree on a lot of stuff internally, but as regards European policy, we stand the same. This was like this every year until the financial crisis, right? So the socialists broke this consensus because of all that talk about austerity versus anti-austerity and all that. But again, once the austerity problem was gone after the Troika, after 2015, so the big commonality as regards Europe returned. So as far as Europe is concerned, there will be no change in policy. So the Socialist Democrats are strong supporters of the Ukraine. Remember that Costa was not a supporter of Ukraine in the first 2 months of the war. He was not. He was forced to become one, which is very different. I mean, Costa is the typical politician of our day, right? He doesn't have any convictions of his own. He is someone who sees where the opportunity is to maximize his power and popularity, and it does that. So as far as Ukraine is concerned, it was the same thing. Why? Because the socialists were very scared that the support to Ukraine would make us eastward shift in Europe, you see? Greater power to Poland, to Czechia, to Romania. A lot of Portugal is very dependent on European funding, right? It was one of the biggest recipients of this latest next generation EU program. Portugal and Greece were the biggest recipients, which goes to show the fragility of these two economies, right? Because you know the criteria that was used to allocate the funds in that program. How far was your economy destroyed or affected by the pandemics and all that? So you were very affected, you'll get a lot of money. So we got the most money, Portugal, Spain, and Greece. And, it goes to show that we are not okay here. Anyway, so as far as Europe, Ukraine, China, America, it will be all the same.
Okay, even with the rise of Chega, we can expect
because Chega won't be there in government.
Yeah,
won't be there in government. And you know, Ventura is like Costa. He's an opportunity guy, a political opportunity guy. His political program is far left, really. He's promising pay raises and state-owned stuff to everyone. It's only on other topics that it shifts to the far right, you see? Like Marine Le Pen did some years ago when she was against the euro, against globalization, you know, kind of hybrid stuff here. When you say, oh, he's on the right, well, you have to understand what is to be on the right when you look into his program, you see?
Exactly. And on that note, we have several questions in the chat. Okay. One is about this question, and we're entering the last 10 minutes now, so short answers will be much appreciated.
I'll try.
But the first one is, you know, what are on voters' minds these days going up to the election Sunday? What makes the newspaper headlines? You know, what are the main topics that are being discussed right now?
That's very easy to answer. It's health. There's a collapse of the National Health Service right now. It's never been as bad as this. So it's a big onus, the big minus on Costa legacy. He ruined the National Health Service. In Portugal, that's sacred. Then you have education. It's collapsing as well. All right. And then you have housing. You know, this trans-European crisis in Portugal is becoming especially hard, harsher than in other European countries. And the Costa introduced last year a big program to try to deal with this crisis, and it was a disaster. Okay, so these are the three topics, and then you have one general topic, which has been, you know, all through all general elections: very low wages. Portugal is a country of very low wages. Okay, so these are the main policy topics, if you will.
So actually, very domestic issues, not concerned with the broader, you know, geopolitical.
Nothing. Portugal is a very close society in that respect.
All right, perfect. Then we have another question: whether or not you could see a coalition, you know, so to speak, across the middle, as we say in Denmark, between the socialists and the social democrats. We've seen this in several countries recently, and also here in Denmark. Is that even an option, you think?
Not this time around. We have experienced that in the past, but again, it's a legacy of Costa. When Costa lost the election and the Social Democrats didn't have an absolute majority, the Prime Minister at the time asked Costa, let's make a coalition together. Okay, you'll be my Vice Prime Minister. And Costa refused and preferred to join the far left. You know, that was the big break that Costa did. That was a very traumatic choice, you see, for the system as a whole. So now this Pedro Nuno Santos guy is a leftist, a pure leftist. It's like a Jeremy Corbyn guy, you know, very committed to being the authentic left without any compromises to liberal culture or conservative culture, no compromises, okay? So he has been insisting that his allies are the far left, the communists, even though they are Stalinists and they support Putin. Yes, they support Putin. And the Trotskyists, you know, this like Die Linke, the allies of Die Linke in Germany, you know, Bloc with Esquerda here, guys who applauded and enjoyed Chavez in Venezuela very much in the past, okay? But he has said, no deals with the Social Democrats. That's treason now. That's treason. And the Social Democrats have returned in kind. So now, for now, even though some Social Democrats would prefer an understanding with the socialists, it's becoming anathema in Portuguese politics. So it's out of the question.
All right. Good. Very, very clear answer on that. So before we end in 5 minutes, there's at least one topic that we'll have to get back to, which I mentioned just at the beginning, which is this question of Costa as a possible candidate for the presidency of the European Council. Because these days, when you see European media talking about who will succeed Charles Michel, he is one of the main candidates alongside Mette Frederiksen. I mean, with all this in mind and the corruption case pending, how do you see his chances? Is it something that people talk about in Portugal as an option, or what do you think is the likely outcome?
Yes. He's been eyeing that job for a long time. He's been lobbying his partners in Europe, Scholz in Germany, Macron in France. He wants the job. But he was planning things in a very different way from what they happen now, right? He didn't expect to resign and all that. So now he's telling his European partners that this inquiry is going to end soon, and it's a big, sort of mistake. It's about the other guys in government, not about himself, so it's okay. You don't have to have any problem with that. And I think most of his partners believe that. It won't be a problem. So apparently the European Socialists, the S&D, will have the European Council chairmanship. And as you know, in Europe, it doesn't count if you are very intelligent or if you have a bright career. It really comes down to how long have you been ruling as compared to your colleagues. And Costa is the second longest serving prime minister after Orbán. I mean, Orbán is actually the longest serving. Before it was Merkel, but now is Orbán. And he gets along very well with Orbán, mind you. He gets along very well with Orbán. Costa is, the opportunity guy, So he's a big contender. He wants the job, but he's trying to cover his traces. You know what he did? He has signed up 2 weeks ago in a postgraduate crash course on arbitrage in law. He's trying to say to the media, I'm going to go back to my law practice. He never had any law practice, but he's trained as a lawyer. He's been a politician all his life, since he was 16. But he's saying, no, I'll become a lawyer. I mean, the guy is 60, you see? But he's actually attending class. I know this because the postgraduate course is taught in my university. So he's now attending Catholic University crash course on arbitrage in law because he's saying, no, I'm not concerned about European election. I'm not after the European Council chairmanship. I'm okay with my life. I disappeared. I think he's bluffing. He's bluffing to remove pressure over him. But if by any chance he won't get the job at the European Council, because don't forget that Eastern countries also want the job. I know they had Donald Tusk very recently, but there's a lot of pressure because if you go to see what the candidates are for the other jobs, European Commission, Eurogroup, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, none of the big candidates come from the East. And the East will be demanding a relevant job for them for all sorts of reasons, namely the situation in Ukraine and all that. And Poland is becoming a real big European power, as you know, economically and in terms of defense. It's going to be the biggest military power in the next 30 years, going to overtake France by the amount of money that they are spending. So anyway, but if he doesn't get the job, he'll be running for president of the Republic here in Portugal, because we'll have that election in January 2026. You see? So he's focusing on these two targets, either one or the other.
But do you expect the corruption investigation to be over by June, May? When is it due to be finished?
Well, you know that for him to be a European Council chairman, he perhaps the decision can be delayed until September, right? Because you'll have the election in June for the European Parliament, but then you'll have all those negotiations, right? For the Commission and all that. So perhaps until September, it can be delayed, the decision on the actual name. So, the socialists have penetrated the world of justice here, the judicial affairs. So it's a big crisis in Portugal because of that. You had a prime minister, socialist ex-prime minister, in jail for corruption. So now Costa and his group are very strong on the investigators. The pressure is relentless. So Costa is saying something that you only hear in, not as democratic countries as the European country, which is, he's saying that this is a political conspiracy against him and the socialists. They have done that before. The corrupt guy, José Sócrates, and before that, when there was this big scandal, a pedophile scandal in Portugal, focused on the socialist leaders as well, 2004. So in those three occasions, and now with Costa, they are saying this is politically motivated. But they are never able to illustrate. It's like Trump, you know, you make accusations. You make accusations and you confuse public opinion. And you never get to say, well, but this conspiracy comes from whom? From the left? From the right? You see? It's a conspiracy theory in order to confuse and, you know.
And so we'll just finish up with one last question, and I'll ask you to give a short answer, even if it's not an easy one, because we have two questions in the chat about Portugal's economic policy going forward after the election. I see there are proposals for a 4 days work week. There's a fight to, the fight against inflation and you say housing and so on. If you were to put it shortly to wrap up this, what's at stake in this election in terms of the economic development or future for Portugal going forward?
That's also easy. I mean, it's binary. The socialists and their partners on the left want more centralized, state-focused initiatives: housing, education, health. For them, the answer is more state and more centralized state. Okay. For the right, and I'm excluding Chega. Chega, I mean, agrees with this, really. They are very socialist in their economic thinking. And it's a way to buy support, really. But the liberals and the social democrats are saying, no. We need more market-oriented solutions in the three areas. And as far as state sector is concerned, more decentralization. Okay? So these are the binary choices there on the table.
So there's still some, as you said, bipolarity to the Portuguese politics, and it seems like a very classic ideological opposition between those two sides. But well, thank you very much for explaining all this to us and getting us to know a lot more about Portuguese politics than we did at the beginning. And thanks everyone for listening. This was our first election webinar of 2014, but will surely not be the last, as we're heading into European Parliament's elections and more. So stay tuned and remember to check the results on Sunday when they're in. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.